America's Voice Live, America's fastest growing news program. With Steve Gruber.
We've got to put America first. You do that by voting and bringing your friends to do the same.
Delivering the latest news, observations, and opinions. With the entire Real America's Voice team, America's Voice Live starts now.
Welcome to America's Voice Live. I'm Steve Gruber. Today is Monday, October the 9th. Let's get to the day's top stories, and let's continue to pray for the families in Israel where there is war today. Israel's been attacked, and in response, they have declared war on Hamas. A U.S. carrier strike group has been ordered to the eastern Mediterranean region, while munitions are being airlifted to Israel as we speak. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West will join me in a minute to discuss this. Also, Sunday evening, while countless U.S. citizens were being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza, and while the bodies of those slaughtered by terrorists were being returned to their families, President Biden, Joe Biden thought it would be a good idea to have a barbecue. Yeah, a barbecue, complete with live music and everything. Then later, in an act of injustice and failure to protect independent citizen journalism, the United States Supreme Court has rejected the final efforts to obtain justice in aborted baby body parts case. We'll tell you about that. Troy Newman, the president of Operation Rescue, is one of the defendants, and he will join me a bit later in the program. But we start here today. War. For the first time in 50 years, Israel has made an official declaration of war after a vicious surprise attack from Hamas in the air, on the ground, and from the water, too. This is the first time the nation has been at war since the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Israel was attacked early Saturday by Hamas terrorists that sent more than 5,000 rockets into the country from the Gaza Strip to the southwest. The Hamas soldiers also breached the border at least 20 locations. At last count, more than 1,100 Israelis have been killed in the attacks. After the rocket attacks began, Hamas soldiers poured into Israel too, attacking and murdering people in their homes. Men, women, children, very young, the elderly, all slaughtered without regard. Dead bodies were defiled on video and shared globally on social media as the monsters celebrated and danced in the streets. At a music festival in the southern part of the country, Hamas flew in on powered hang gliders and came up with pickup trucks. Nearly 300 young people massacred in the early morning light. The brutality of the attacks has drawn comparisons to ISIS and has been in the works for several weeks, we're learning, with the backing and support of Iran, of course. This is what weakness in the White House brings. Let me say that again. This is what weakness in the White House brings. We already have the first major war in Eastern Europe in decades, and now the first war involving Israel in 50 years. And, well, President Joe Biden, he's just too tired to do anything about Israel today. That's right, because the White House called a lid before noon today, which means he won't be out to talk about anything. They won't be taking questions from the press. They won't be talking to anybody. Biden needs his sleep after all the big barbecue yesterday. This comes after he failed to say anything on Saturday until the attacks had been underway for about 8 hours. Needed his sleep then, too, apparently. Weakness brings violence, and weakness brings war, because the enemies that are kept at bay by American strength around the world are empowered by opportunities provided by the weakness of Joe Biden and his feeble administration on the world stage. Congresswoman Claudia Tenney laid the blame at the feet of the weakest president in modern times. Listen to this.
We are projecting weakness around the world, particularly on real key issues. Our greatest ally, the only democracy in the Middle East, Israel. And I urge everyone to stand by them. And it's good to know that our colleagues on both sides of the aisle are doing that right now. But the administration has got to be responsible for this. They need to take a stronger stand. And you just referred to that tweet that I saw coming up earlier, which I immediately responded to. It was egregious for the administration to look as if this was both sides. This is a clear attack from Hamas, sponsored by Iran, against our greatest ally. This is not about Israel, anything about Israel doing anything aggressive. They need to stand up and they need to defend their citizens. I'm with Netanyahu and 100% on this. The Israelis need to stand strong, and we need to be with them.
And where is Joe Biden to project American strength? Nowhere. 11:32 a.m., the lid was called for the day. He won't be out at all. He can't do it. He can't lead this country. Former President Donald Trump will speak today. Former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy will speak today. But the actual president, the so-called leader of the free world, He's not available at a time when our number one ally is under attack in a 9/11 Pearl Harbor type surprise attack. It's just another failure that could have been avoided, and I will dig deeper on that in a bit. But first, how could this have been missed by Israel and all Western intelligence services? I mean, was everyone asleep at the wheel and not just Joe Biden? Listen.
It's quite astonishing, and there'll be plenty of investigations to find out why this is so. But you're absolutely right. There's such close cooperation between Israeli and American intelligence. You know, we cooperate to give intelligence information to Ukraine, both Israel and the United States. It is difficult to envision how Hamas could have, even over a long period of time, even quietly accumulated so many missiles from Iran, position them to attack at the ready. These kinds of things are relatively easy to detect. In addition, we have human intelligence. We don't. The Israelis have human intelligence assets inside Gaza. One of the things that comes to mind is that Hamas may have spent a long period of time getting rid of, isolating, imprisoning those people who they thought were fifth columnists inside Gaza, making it difficult for Israel to get human intelligence out of Gaza and correlate that with other information that they have. Even so, it is difficult to envision how American, Western, and Israeli intelligence could miss this buildup.
Yeah, plenty of questions here today, and you have to wonder, if they all missed the buildup of more than 5,000 rockets, what else are we missing? Especially at our southern border, where we'd let in more than 7 million unvetted people in the last 32 months. I'll get to that, too. The leaders of Hamas are now admitting that the planning for this coordinated assault on the state of Israel was led in large part by Iran, the world's number one sponsor of terrorism. Retired General Jack Keane was clear that Iran was behind the attacks and the murderous rampage on Israeli homes and elsewhere. And that could be the next step, by the way. Hezbollah terrorists coming out of Lebanon from the north. About 140,000 hardened soldiers there ready to attack Israel as well. It could be a two-front war full-blown soon. Listen to this.
And the last time they got into it with Hezbollah was back in 2006, and they didn't do so well. After a month, they pulled out of there. And all of the service chiefs were fired by the prime minister for what he believed was incompetence. So that is in the back of their mind as well, right, in dealing with this. They do not want Hezbollah into this operation. Right. Iran is behind this. They scored a strategic victory here. What is that victory? The normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel is on hold. That is for sure. I don't think it'll go away, but it's obviously going to be delayed rather significantly as a result of this.
And remember, Joe Biden and his administration, his team, just released $6 billion to Iran. And even though it's supposed to be spent on humanitarian items only, and none of it's spent so far, it's clear that it frees up money for other things. You know, things like killing moms and their kids inside their own homes on a Jewish holiday. And don't forget, we also just lifted sanctions on Iranian oil. 2 billion barrels a month going out now. You do the math. Here's Anthony Blinken, who refuses to admit the obvious, and that was America unfreezing $6 billion for Iran and being soft on them made attacks like this one on Israel so much easier. Here he is.
First, with regard to the funds that you mentioned that were were made available to Iran for humanitarian purposes as part of getting Americans back who are being held and detained in Iran. Let's be very clear about this. And it's deeply unfortunate that some are playing politics when so many lives have been lost and Israel remains under attack. The facts are these. No U.S. Taxpayer dollars were involved. These were Iranian resources that Iran had accumulated from the sale of its oil that were stuck in a bank in South Korea. They have had from day one, under our law, under our sanctions, the right to use these monies for humanitarian purposes. They were moved from one account to another in another country to facilitate that use. As of now, not a single dollar has been spent from that account. And again, the account is closely regulated by the U.S. Treasury Department, so it can only be used for things like food, medicine, medical equipment. That's what this is about.
Yeah, you see, this money was already Iran's, and the Biden administration decision to just give them access to it had nothing to do with any of this. Even though Antony Blinken later admitted that, yes, of course he knows Iran funds terrorist organizations around the globe, which of course they do, the number one state sponsor of terrorism, clearly for decades, since 1979. Here's more.
What do you say about the argument that money is fungible? So Iran may have known this money is coming and used other funds to help fund this attack that happened.
Iran has unfortunately always used and focused its funds on supporting terrorism, on supporting groups like Hamas. And it's done that when there have been sanctions. It's done that when there haven't been sanctions. And it's always prioritized that. And again, I come back to the proposition that these funds have always been, under the law, available to Iran to use for humanitarian purposes.
Yeah, this is also a guy who called almost immediately for a ceasefire as well on social media, even though his boss paid lip service in a speech over the weekend that lasted a few seconds to say that Israel has a right to defend itself. The acts of violence are so despicable. I've watched some of them. I hope you never have to see it. Lighting women on fire, burning them in the streets. Defiling Israeli soldiers. Killing families in their own home. Most of the world is not seeing how depraved all of this really is. It's not suitable for TV news, you see, and is blacked out mostly on social media as well, but some information is sneaking out. I've seen parts of it. So is Congressman Chip Roy, and he says sources inside Israel are telling him and showing him the brutality of these monsters. Here's what he had to say.
What we're seeing is savagery. What we're seeing is direct attacks on civilians. Prime Minister Netanyahu is 100% correct to say that he's going to take buildings in Gaza Strip down to rubble, where Hamas is using it to hide behind civilians. He's 100% correct. And to be very clear, I'm sick and tired of watching Democrats try to cover up for their complicity. It is this Democrat administration, the Biden administration, my Democratic colleagues in Congress, who are complicit in what has now just occurred in Israel because of their appeasement policies, their head in the sand policies. And they want to hide behind, the $6 billion that is sitting there in Qatar. Don't worry, Mark. Don't worry, Chip. You shouldn't get upset about that because they're not using it. Not a dollar's been spent. Bull. That's going to fund the next attack if it hasn't already funded the current attacks. But here's what really matters. The million barrels of oil going from Iran to China because we lifted the sanctions, because this administration wants to bow down to the altar of the climate cult, and they want us to be beholden to other countries so they can advance their radical agenda.
And that is a great point. The Biden administration helped this along in other ways, like letting Iran profit from oil sales much more than they would have if Trump were in office, of course, when those sanctions would have still been in place. And after all of the failures and weakness, now seems like the world is exploding around us. We have two wars to deal with, one in Ukraine, one in Israel now. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says with the declaration of war issued by the Israeli parliament, they will turn Gaza into rubble, and they will hunt down every Hamas member, fighter, or supporter and kill them all. They have no choice. He's warning residents to leave Gaza because the IDF is coming with a vengeance, and there will be nothing left when the shooting stops. They are sending texts, tweets, and things of that nature. If you're in a certain building, they give you notice. That building's going to be gone in about 15 minutes. You better leave. And what will that mean, especially when the fighting moves into Gaza City itself, even if it is just rubble? Well, it'll mean the most horrific kind of fighting you can imagine. Let me explain. Here it is.
The most horrific kind of fighting is door-to-door fighting. And the type of fighting that we're going to have to do there is against an enemy that respects life in no way, shape, or form. They're going to use humans, civilians as sandbags. They're going to do fighting out of civilian positions. CQB, this door-to-door type of fighting is truly the worst type of fighting that you can do, and doing it with neighbors that you've lived peacefully with for a very long time, but now are being used as leverage. Every time a civilian dies, that's more propaganda for Hamas. It's a win-win for them to have to fight this kind of fight. Israel has been trying so hard to not be in this fight for this exact reason, and this is the fight that Hamas wants.
Yeah. And sadly, like I said, this is only the beginning. And the thing we are all fearful of, a widening war in the Middle East. We know it all leads back now to Iran. A bigger war could be at hand because the next phase of this fighting is going to be fierce, to say the least. Here's one more thought on that. Listen.
Yeah, Netanyahu is going to have to go into Gaza. But Hamas knew this, and so Hamas has likely beefed up its internal defenses because urban warfare is particularly horrible. Think about Fallujah or Bakhmut, or even when Israel went into Beirut. It's very, very difficult, and so this phase one will be much less bloody. The phase two, when Israel has to go into Gaza, will be much bloodier for Israel.
Yeah, and here's the thing. This war, starting in southern Israel, could involve Hezbollah to the north. But it will end, I believe, in Tehran. That's where this war will end, because Iran is behind this. Hamas has said so. How it was missed by Mossad and others, I don't know. How all Western intelligence missed it, I don't know. But the Biden administration freeing up $6 billion is a fool's errand. Truly, some of this administration must hate this country, because if the CIA could not see this, how are they going to see any possible attack coming from people who have entered our country illegally to the southern border? We know for a fact that people on the terror watch list have crossed the southern border into America. And the Biden administration just throws their hands up and acts like it's not a big deal. Hopefully it never comes. But after what we've seen this weekend, I have no faith in this government or our intelligence services that decide to go after Trump supporters and January 6 people rather than terrorists crossing our southern border. We need to get our act together soon. After the break, a U.S. carrier strike group headed to the eastern Mediterranean too. We'll have Lieutenant Colonel Alan West coming up.